Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guest, we provide the knowledge, skills, insight, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. As lawyers, we can sometimes feel that it's easier to follow a well-worn path than blaze a trail of our own. To be fair, it's not really in our nature. It's not the way that we were trained, so it can feel a little antithetical to the practice of law to try to innovate within the industry. Over the years, I've learned that some of the happiest lawyers that I've met are those lawyers who've made their own way in the profession. And on today's show, I chat with Melissa Hall about how she's innovating in her practice in order to provide services in a manner that will not just better serve her clients' needs, but also serve her own lifestyle choices. I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome back to the Happy Lawyer Project, lawyers. I am really excited to introduce you to today's guest, who I happen to have met on Lawyer Smack, which you guys recall I had the founder on a couple weeks ago. So if you guys haven't joined, you still have an opportunity to do that. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce you guys to Melissa Hall. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So I'd love if you could start with just a brief description of who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay. I am a lawyer. I live in Seattle, and my practice mostly consists at this point of cocktail party law. Well, the story behind my firm started 3 or 4 years ago when I was helping my wife change her name. And there are a lot of things that you just don't think about that come up where it's handy to have a lawyer. And I was like, well, what do people who are not married to a lawyer do? Life went on. We moved to a new state. I got a new bar number. And I was like, well, what do I do now? And it occurred to me that I should try setting up a firm to answer those kinds of small questions that most lawyers don't tackle or do on a friends and family basis or try to avoid. And that is my exclusive practice now.
So what were you doing before you moved to Seattle, where you are now?
I was actually enforcing national flood insurance policy in Western Virginia.
And how did you like that?
Well, I attended many small city government meetings and explained to them that, like, the National Flood Insurance Program is a voluntary program, but there are consequences to no longer being a member community. It was great. I loved being the man from town. I was a happy bureaucrat, too. I don't think you're supposed to admit to that, but there is only so much traveling you can do when you decide it's time to settle down and have a kid.
Interesting. This is like an area of law that I've never even thought about. So I'm just so interested to know how you found yourself in that role.
Well, through a series of misadventures after attending law school, I ended up working for the Florida Department of Emergency Management in my previous career role as a geographer. And this and that happened, and I ended up going into the National Flood Insurance Program, which has mandatory zoning requirements for flood-prone areas.
Every time you add a detail, it doesn't make it clearer to me. It just makes me more interested. So let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Why did you go to law school to begin with?
I went to law school to be a land use attorney.
And you went through law school. While in law school, did you kind of focus on those areas? Did you find other areas of law that interested you more? Did it meet your expectations?
I went to law school. I had a great time. I worked with Professor Mandelker at WashU. I worked on research for his casebook on land use planning. And I graduated and I got a job at the Land Use Planning Review Agency for the state of Florida. So everything seemed to be absolutely on track.
Fantastic. Everything went as planned. And then?
And then, well, a combination of things happened. First of all, I did not take bar review, so I did not get my license the first time around.
Oh, interesting.
And also, the agency got zero lined on the budget. They said no often to people with a lot of money, and that was not very popular. So the agency I was working for went away.
There's two parts to that. First, sorry to hear about the whole bar situation. I know, lots of very successful lawyers didn't pass the bar the first time. Kind of what was your plan of action once you got those results back? Were you somebody who kind of took it in stride? Did it take you some time to get over that? How did that transpire? Because I know there's lots of people out there listening who may be in that stage right now where they recently got back a bad score themselves.
Yeah, well, I wish I could say I was one of those who just bounced right back and went right back to it. But between this and that, it was like, well, I guess I'm just not doing that anymore. I was really lucky because I had my previous career to fall back on. So I knew I could go back to being a geographer.
I'm sorry, what does a geographer do?
No, I understand. Like, people don't think of it being a real thing that people do.
I'm imagining you'd make maps, but that's not the right thing.
Well, have you ever seen like a Google map of targeted locations?
Yes.
That I did data analysis, back-end database, that kind of thing.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm all caught up. So
yeah.
You were able to go back to being a geographer and then, but you were still committed to taking the bar, or when did you decide that you were going to give it another go?
I worked emergency management for 2.5 years and decided to take the bar again.
And what was the impetus for that after 2.5 years?
I decided that I did not want to leave that kind of business unfinished in my life, if that makes sense.
No, that does. Good for you. I think, these things take as long as they take, and you're not the first person who's kind of had a story where they walked away from something and then realized that they wanted to come back and see it to fruition, no matter what the result,
Well, and realistically, I was working at a state government salary and on a really irregular schedule. It took that long for me to have the time and money.
Fair enough. There's also the practical concerns always.
Yeah.
So you have this career, you're doing this and that, and ultimately you end up moving to Seattle and you launch this new practice. So let's talk a little bit about that and how that business came to be and really the practical side of it. How did you go about, the process of actually launching a solo practice? Because I know everybody has different ideas of what it means to set up a shingle.
Yes. Well, the first thing that I worked on was the business plan. Most lawyers use, is it the Kravinoff model? Is that how you say the name of that firm?
I don't know. I've never said it out loud.
Well, yes.
Let's go with it.
Yeah, most people use the standard plan from the 1930s where you have partners and, you bill by the hour and you, particularly with solo, maybe you deeply specialize in one area. For me, because I knew that wasn't what I wanted, I started by talking with people who ran other kinds of businesses and writing a really traditional business model about like what my cash flow would look like and what my expenses would look like and how I could make this probably not profitable right away, but break even pretty quickly.
Would you say that you're somebody who's naturally financially or business minded?
Not really. I had good fortune of being raised with access to my grandfather, who was a businessman. He taught me really quite a few useful things, but I'm not necessarily business oriented. However, I love solving problems. And in some ways, my entire firm is an attempt to solve a problem.
Yeah. And I love the model of your firm and kind of the service that you're trying to offer your clients. And, when you were thinking about how you were going to make money, kind of, did you go through lots of iterations to get to your current system? And you can talk, I'd love if you could talk a little bit what your current system is, but kind of what processes did you go through and how long did it take for you to land on the one you use today?
It's taken me all of this time. I'm finally at a point where I have a long-term viable system if I pull everything off. It isn't obvious, so I started off doing flat fee, and then I went to a tip-based model, which worked pretty well. Now I'm about to go to the third version of pricing that I've used, which is I have supporting clients, which are just old-fashioned availability retainer clients who pay me $25 for an individual, $50 for a family per month to be available to answer these questions for them. My supporting clients work on a temp-based system. General community clients, I'm going back to a flat fee because it was confusing. And basically everything I've learned ended up being part of my model. It was just I tried a bunch of different things because it isn't clear what you charge for people asking you a random question.
And I think in general, there's a lot of innovation that's happening in the legal profession around how we make money and how we charge our clients and how we value the service that we provide. So it's very interesting to see kind of what you're doing at the front end, because I think that's really where you are is, there's so much in the niching down and charging a lot.
Yeah. And I call what I do primary care law or legal primary care, because I think we've reached a point like the medical industry where everybody is so specialized that there's really a role for somebody who is a generalist, and that is their specialty. And that is the niche that I'm trying to fill.
And so what kind of challenges did you face in trying to establish yourself in that space? Because I know that there are, I'm sure, ethical considerations to take in mind when trying to practice kind of generally. And I guess now that I think about that, small town lawyers probably have similar practices where they practice kind of whatever walks in the door. Mm-hmm. But in a city like Seattle, that's probably a lot less common. How did people in the community, in the legal community, view it?
Well, that was one of the things that I have talked to a couple of people about. And I feel like everyone I've consulted about the ethics of it feels like, yes, the idea that generalism is a specialty might be an idea whose time has come in law, because there are many kinds of problems that span several fields of law. And if you go to a specialist attorney, you're not going to see a full picture of your problem. We often sell specialization as the way to avoid malpractice issues, but what we've done is we've managed to drill down so tightly that frequently people don't have any view above their narrow range. And that's kind of where I see both the avoidance of malpractice issues, obviously, but also my value to the community as a whole come in. The other issue is, of course, old-fashioned retainers. Nobody's done them in a while, generally. I mean, there are probably still some people who have availability retainers, but they're not common. And that's why I realized I had to call it something else. Fortunately, for the clients that I look for, who are mostly younger, often in the queer trans community, the idea of Patreon has given me a platform for talking about things like availability retainers, and that's why I call them supporting clients instead.
Are the issues that are brought to you specific to the community, or do you think they're just kind of more general issues that everybody faces and kind of has questions about and doesn't have a lawyer, but that you attract a certain kind of client because of your openness to serve that community?
I get a large mix of just general legal questions. I think everyone who's a practicing attorney gets a certain number of these, but I get a little more. I also have a small niche of specialty questions around things like name and gender marker change, mm-hmm. or assisted reproduction, where I have a little bit more of an in-depth view.
That's so interesting. So how long have you had this practice now?
I am 3 months into my second year. I started 2017.
And how long did it take you to break even?
I keep breaking even and then adding expenses and then breaking even again.
I think that's always going to be the hard thing about starting a solo practice. Mm-hmm. And you want to invest in your business to grow your business.
Yeah. Basically, I was able to break even within 3 months on my really low expenses model. But then I had a baby and I decided I wanted co-working space. So I had space to work that was not baby invested. They're lovely, but they do take over everything. And so then I had to earn more money in order to make that work. Right now, because I'm doing a bigger advertising push for the supporting clients, I'm back in the red. I expect it to take 3 years to get to the point where I'm consistently profitable at the level where I'm drawing a salary.
3 years from now or 3 years?
3 years from founding.
Okay. So hopefully in the coming months, it'll start to.
Yes.
And do you think that's pretty typical for people out there who are interested in possibly going, out on their own? I've heard lots of different advice on this, but what do you think is a good estimate for people when they're trying to build their own runway?
Well, I kind of took the hardest path. I'm having to figure out how to advertise a kind of law that is consumer-based, which is the most expensive kind of advertisement you can probably do. And also, I'm having to do a lot of client education because since lawyers haven't generally been available to the average person for 2-3 generations sometimes now, people don't think about what kind of questions they might need legal advice for.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense to me. And I think that the client education, that's even true, I think, across all spectrums. I think as lawyers, some large percentage of our job is client education.
Mm-hmm.
But it's certainly different in your space when you're going direct to consumer because you don't have maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to scale the same way.
No, it's really interesting. The thing that I most undervalued when I started my firm was the value of having that relationship. And as I've learned from my clients, the thing that I really sell, well, it's legal advice, but it's also the reassurance that if something scary happens, and almost all of the issues we deal with are scary in some way, they have somebody they trust to ask.
I've been pondering that a lot lately because in coming in-house, I now get the wonderful opportunity to work with a lot of my own external counsel. And it's so interesting to me to see the difference between the lawyers who think of themselves as practitioners, like specialists, and the ones who think of themselves as my trusted advisors.
Uh-huh.
And how much more business the trusted advisors get.
Yeah.
Just because I know that, they'll take me out to dinner and they'll ask me real questions about my business so that they can understand what my needs are and really anticipate issues. Whereas I think that the experts, while really great in what they do, tend to really focus their inquiries to ways they can help me. Mm-hmm. And the information that's important it's very them focused.
Well, and there's a real difference in vulnerability between those two roles. In the consumer end, it's the difference between selling a relationship and selling a legal product. If you're selling a legal product, well, the consumer has to do all the work of figuring out that they need whatever that legal product is, a lease or divorce or, what have it. If you're selling a relationship, what you're asking people to do is trust your expertise. And that's a way more vulnerable situation. I suspect that's why fewer lawyers are comfortable with it.
Let's be honest, lawyers don't always have the best EQ skills.
Yes.
Especially the ones who thrive, in the law firm environment. Right. Those two don't tend to go hand in hand, but not obviously
it's not a great place for the vulnerable.
Yep.
Sorry.
No, agreed. I think that I definitely do see wonderful lawyers who are very open and caring and, wonderful counselors and give me wonderful service. But more than not, you have to find them amongst the others. Yeah, I want to transition a little bit kind of to more of your lifestyle stuff because I know that you're somebody who does invest in kind of self-care and you changed your business model because you were having a daughter instead of not having a daughter in order to grow your business. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about how you kind of make decisions and what your strategies are around balancing the business you're growing alongside the family you're growing.
Well, the best thing for me has always been to do work that I'm passionately involved with, and then it doesn't feel like work. The downside is if I'm going to do that, I really have to limit myself and pace myself. It might not be obvious, but that was one of the real lessons I took away from working in emergency management. They had absolute limits. You could work 13, 12-hour shifts, and then if you showed up for that 14th day, a highway patrolman would take you home because you were just no longer effective. And you didn't feel like it because your executive functioning is usually the first thing to go. But you weren't making good choices anymore. Similarly, I try very hard to arrange my life so that I have a pleasant amount of work, which for me is 20 to 30 hours a week. And it doesn't feel overwhelming or like it's all that I do in a day.
I think there are people who will be surprised to hear that you're growing a business on 20 to 30 hours a week. How do you, and not that you can't grow a business on that much.
No.
I definitely think you can, but more of the mental component. How do you limit yourself and how do you stop yourself from wanting to spend 40, 60 hours on it?
Well, first of all, I view work as like a treat I give myself. Having meaningful work is one of the best things in life. So it's not that I artificially impose limits. It's just that I know I only do my best work at certain times of the day. So I slot that. I know that's the time I have. And then when I'm done, it's my time to go read a novel. And that's the next thing on my calendar. And I try to respect that. I can't always because life sometimes gets a little crazy. You know, kids get sick, plans get changed. You have to get something to the courthouse. But by and large, I find that respecting my own timeline makes the time that I work much more effective. If I have big slots of time, it feels like I have forever to get something done. If I have 2 hours, then I actually get it accomplished because I only have the 2 hours.
One of the dilemmas that I ponder a lot is kind of the relationship between that mentality, which I also which I share and I think was for me very clear once I had children and the billable hour.
Yeah.
You know, I think that there's always going to be an issue reconciling the two. And for me, I think personally, I got to the point where I knew what kind of work I wanted to do, the people I wanted to work with, and I had to let go of this idea of hitting kind of billable targets. Like I wasn't going to work just to hit that target. And
yeah.
I was willing to accept whatever the repercussions of that was going to be. But based on the idea that I was building relationships with the partners and associates I really wanted to work with and getting the training on the deals I really wanted to do and doing the best quality work I could do, and was just kind of keeping my fingers crossed that that would be enough. And, if it wasn't, then I was going to be willing to live with that. But I guess what are your thoughts on that? Just because I know so many lawyers are kind of stuck in that headspace where they would love to cut back on hours. They would love to just limit the time to the hours a day when they do good work. That sounds lovely. But when you're expected to bill 10 hours a day, how do you set that boundary?
Well, I think this is one of the advantages to having worked in emergency management. I haven't ever had that billable hour requirement, so I can't really help people deal with that. But I found for myself that recognizing that you have limits and that everyone has limits makes it much easier to respect those. I worked in an environment where those limits were enforced, and you really, it sounds dumb, but you fought not being able to come back in because things were bad. Things were literally underwater and you wanted to help. But then you saw how different that first day back was from that last day. And I think the thing is, a lot of lawyers just never really get the time and the headspace to see how different their work is when they're able to come at it from with a certain amount of perspective and with the relaxed viewpoint that comes with like giving yourself time and space and rest and all the other things that you need because you're a human being too.
No, I love that. And I think that, wellness and mindfulness are things that the legal profession needs in spades.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're really cruel to ourselves. And it's kind of weird because we're the people that are expected to deal with everyone else's humanity.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of one of our roles, but doing so by denying our own. And that doesn't usually lead to very healthy people or culture or anything.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think that we do a disservice to ourselves and we do a disservice to our clients. And there is obviously a lot of change that needs to occur But it's happening. I see it happening slowly, and you see more conversations that are really encouraging, and hopefully we'll see more of that going forward.
Yeah, to be blunt, lawyer used to be one of those professions that was really a two-person job and the other person was just not acknowledged. And that just hasn't been possible for 2 generations, but we still want to pretend that it is. And I think that as we deal more with the reality that no, a lawyer has to have both a personal life and a social life and a home life, all of these things that used to kind of be outsourced, the profession will eventually change.
I'm just internalizing that and trying to decide. I agree. And I think that that's always been a conversation that's been kind of under the undercurrent of all the conversations about successful lawyers, male or female. It was really having a support system that was willing to take on the rest of the burden of life.
Yeah.
And, it's obviously slightly harder for the woman just because you can't outsource having the children. So I guess you can. There are lots of women who adopt, and I knew lots of female partners who did, obviously not just to outsource, but because, they had waited until later in life to decide to start their family. So you can even outsource that. But certainly there's definitely a trend. And it was, it didn't matter what the other person did. They used their wives or husbands used to also be lawyers and doctors, but somebody gave up their profession in order to make the team work.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that's fair to the lawyer, right? Like, I don't know if the lawyer wants to only be half of a full person's life.
Well, I don't think that there are some people it seems to work beautifully for, but I don't think it's really attractive to most people as a deal.
No.
Either way.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
So knowing what you know now, you've kind of been through this non-linear legal career. You're on the upswing with your own practice. What advice would you give to a new lawyer who's just now starting out and kind of worried that they aren't going to find their passion in the law, or that they're not going to be able to create a life around the practice because the practice in itself is just so grueling?
Well, it took me 10 years to figure out what it meant to practice law. Once I figured out what it meant, it got much easier. So as pie in the sky and fluffy as that seems, that would be my answer. Figure out what it means for you to practice law. And then you will find all of it makes a lot more sense and is a lot easier.
That's Melissa Hall's, Simon Sinek, start with your why,
Yeah. It took me 10 years to figure out that for me, the practice of law was about negotiating between people and the administrative state within which they live. Once I figured that out, it was easier to see meaning, and it was easier to form a practice around where I found meaning. But until I had that big meaning, all of the little meanings I couldn't get to, and work without meaning is just always going to be grueling.
I love that. What's the best way for people to learn more about your practice or follow your work or reach out to you?
My email is probably the best way. I'm usually pretty responsive. It's melissa@smollaw.com, but Smol is spelled SMOL-law.com.
Fantastic. And I will include that in the show notes to the episode so people can get that from you as well. Well, thank you so much for being a part of the project and sharing your story with us here today. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. And before I let you go, I want to ask you the last question, which I ask everybody on the show. And I think you've touched on it a little bit, but what do you think separates happy lawyers from lawyers who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
I think that happy lawyers have found a meaning and a purpose within the field of law, and people who struggle are just kind of doing a job. The other thing I would say is that I find generally happy lawyers manage to focus on doing as much as possible of the stuff that they like and are comfortable letting go and trusting other people with the stuff that they don't like and aren't good at.
That is such good advice. I think that's probably the worst part of being a junior lawyer is you can't do that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because you don't know, but even if you did know, it's really hard to have anybody let you do that.
Yeah. Although I have managed to delegate to colleagues before, it is amazing what people will do if you just praise their ability.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Maybe that's a limiting belief of my own, that was possible. I'm a huge believer in the power of delegating, and I definitely, once I learned what I liked in the law, and I've never really thought about it this way, but once I learned what I liked and was willing to delegate the rest, I just found so much more peace in my practice.
And I bet your quality of work went way up. I mean, it's not that you can't do good work through brute effort, but you can tell when there isn't love.
Agreed. Oh, completely agree. And my job now being in-house, I obviously have a lot less support than I had at the firm. And so there's not as many people to delegate to. Well, I have outside counsel, of course, but that costs me.
Yes.
So I do end up having to do a lot more that I wouldn't want to do necessarily. But because I am literally the only person at my company who does what I do, I also get to craft my job and keep the things in-house that I love most.
Well, and also, at least for me, I find that I will do things that I dislike for relationship that I will not do for the area of law itself.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thanks so much for listening this week, you guys, and joining me for the Happy Lawyer Project podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please feel free to share it with your friends, and I'd love for you to head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's already left a review, sent me an email, DM'd me on Instagram, or reached out to me in any other way. I truly appreciate you and love hearing from you. And I want to just remind everyone that this week's sponsor is Common Bond. So if you're considering refinancing your student loans this year, I would definitely head over to commonbond.co/happylawyer to check them out. As a reminder, you'll receive a $200 cash bonus for using that link. Until next week, I hope everyone finds their happy.